Everyone prepares for birth and almost nobody prepares for what comes after. I'm Meg Faure and welcome to the podcast if you're new to us, and of course, welcome to all of our subscribers. Today, we are turning the podcast on its head, and I am joined by Tove, who will be our host today. Now, Tove is a seasoned mom, and she is also my business partner. And today, she's going to be asking me questions about the fourth trimester, which is the first 12 weeks after birth, that are simultaneously the most overwhelming and yet also the most important weeks of your baby's life and yours. So here's what we're going to unpack today. We're going to have a look at why the first 6 weeks are genuinely brutal for every parent, and why feeling like you don't know what you're doing doesn't mean that you're getting it wrong. Secondly, we're going to talk about milestones, and milestones are not mile markers. They are actually wide windows. And so one late milestone is simply not a red flag. And we're going to talk about what actually warrants concern and what doesn't. And then we're going to talk about your newborns. So your newborns just have gone from the most beautifully regulated environment in the womb to the most overstimulating world imaginable. And we cover off what signs to look out for that your baby is struggling with sensory overload. And it's actually a surprisingly simple fix. And then fourthly, we go on to talk about the one thing that your baby will need in the first few weeks. And it's not a toy, it's not a class or a specific schedule. We'll tell you what it is. We talk about how to get there and how to really take care of your little ones in the first few weeks. So if you are in the thick of the fourth trimester right now, this episode is for you. And if you know somebody who is right there, please do share this episode with them. And of course, please do subscribe, because then you'll always know and be updated about when there is a new episode. Welcome to Sense by Meg Faure, where we make sense of the science and art of parenting. Parenting is grey, gritty, and beautiful all at once. And my life's work as a healthcare professional is helping parents feel more confident in a season that can feel really overwhelming. In each episode, we share honest conversations with real mums, dive into the science with experts, and simply make sense of it all in practical ways. This is your space. You're not alone, you're held. So let's unpack the journey of a lifetime with sense.
So Meg, I'm going to kick off by asking some questions around the fourth trimester. The fourth trimester is one of the most overwhelming and under-supported phases of parenting. Parents are exhausted, your baby seems to do nothing, but they seem to kind of do everything all at once. There seems to be this development happening, and everyone has an opinion. I would love to know what milestones, are we overly obsessed with milestones? Milestones are such a big part of the parenting kind of guilt and the journey. Are we tracking them? Are we over-tracking them? Are we looking for them too hard? What's the right relationship to have with milestones?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, Tove, that the first 6 weeks are a drown. I mean, I literally had a mom who WhatsApped me yesterday and she was like, I've got a 5-week-old baby. Like, I'm at the rock face. I feel like I'm feeding all the time. My baby seems to be really fussy suddenly. I don't know whether or not to settle them. I'm feeding kind of every hour and a half. My baby does nothing except feed and sleep, and I'm just getting nothing out of it. And it's such an ungratifying time. And that's just such a common experience of parents. And I think a lot in the early days, a lot of parents are kind of feeling like, what's going on here? I seem to be feeding. I'm in the cycle of feeding, watching, sleeps, and soothing. And I'm missing all these milestones. I'm not doing anything around the milestones. Like what should I be looking for, and should I be anxious about milestones? So I think, first of all, to acknowledge that these first 6 weeks are brutal. It's such a wake-up call. No parent who is honest is not experiencing that. So moms, if you're feeling like you are the one who has not got it right and everybody else seems to have it right, you need to know that you're in good company. Everyone is in a veritable drown in the first 6 weeks. And in addition to that, most parents are not doing anything around milestones and are not focused on them, because it's just such a kind of rudimentary stage of life where you're just taking care of the basics. But there's actually a huge amount going on in your baby's brain. And in just being alive and having the occasional feeds and and having the sleeps and interacting with you a little bit, there's a huge amount that's going on in terms of milestones. So I think the first message, aside from this is normal, is that just in keeping your baby alive, you're ticking every box. You don't need to be doing anything else. So
every parent would love to hear that. Just keep them alive.
Just keep them alive now and you're fine. Of course, milestones are something that we start to watch for, and maybe not in the first 5 weeks, but certainly from 5 weeks onwards, we start to see some really meaningful shifts. And even in the first 5 weeks, which we'll talk about a little later, there are things that are happening. But I think an important thing in the context of this whole program that we're talking about today, in this particular episode, is that I don't want parents to get hysterical about milestones, because milestones are quite an interesting thing. They actually happen on a very wide range of normal. So, of course, the word milestone was a stone that was placed at every mile along a path, and that's how people could measure how far they're moving towards a place. And this is obviously before we had wonderful GPS and our Garmin watches and so on. That was a milestone, and so it happened at an exact moment in time at an exact distance, and so you measured life around these these distances. The reality about baby milestones is that they are absolutely not like that. They happen in wide ranges of normal, and they are very variable between little ones. So, and if you've had 2 children, it's the best experiment because you can see how different they are. And if you've had twins, it's an even better experiment because they are so different, and their milestones happen differently. One crawls at a certain time, the other one crawls later, as an example. But what does happen is that most milestones happen in a trajectory, which means that they happen in a sequence that's pretty logical. So a baby will smile, well, they'll make eye contact before they smile before they babble, they'll babble before they start to do reciprocal language, and they will do reciprocal language before they speak. And so the actual order of events is correct, and the windows are something that we watch for. So smiling, for instance, can happen anywhere between as early as 3 weeks, and we'll talk about that today, I'm sure, and as late as 6 or 7 or 8 weeks even. So there's these wide ranges, and we watch for the ranges and the sequence rather than the day on which it should supposedly happen.
So what should parents be doing or not doing to kind of support this? And like, when do you panic? Like, when do you, I mean, if this is right trajectory, so at what point does that become like a point of anxiety or something that parents should be looking out for?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Look, I think when you've got one milestone that is that is late, so it's really late. It's later than, for instance, the ranges that we have in the Parent Sense app. And moms, if you want to know what milestones, what the order looks like, and the ranges, if you go into the play section of the Parent Sense app, you'll see there that the milestones are listed in order of approximately when they happen in that order, and then there's a window that will say like 3 to 8 weeks as an example. And think if you've got one milestone that falls out of that range, I would completely relax. I wouldn't worry about it. I'd take note of it, but I wouldn't really worry about it. And it certainly wouldn't be a red flag for me. When we start to raise red flags is in 2 circumstances. One is when there is consistently late milestones. So every single milestone is late, is missed, is outside of the window. And you won't really have a sense of that within the first kind of 3 or 4 weeks, that's for sure. You maybe get a sense of that by 6 months, that, oh, like this is, my baby did not make eye contact ever, maybe. My baby only smiled at like 15 weeks. My baby has never done reciprocal language. Then you've got a lot of things that are going on there, and that would, for me, be a red flag. So consistently late milestones would be one thing. And the other thing is that sometimes we get buckets of milestones that happen perfectly in order and other buckets of milestones that happen out of order. So let me explain those buckets. Every type of development that goes through the baby's in a baby happens in almost like a bucket, or a theme. So let's talk about the theme of gross motor skills. Gross motor skills, that bucket would be baby unravels, so unrolls a bit, it spends time in tummy time, rolls, sits, crawls, walks. You can see that. That's all a gross motor bucket. Another bucket would be a social bucket, eye contact, smiling, babbling, reciprocal language. That's all in the social bucket. So if you can think about those as 2 buckets, and there are various different other buckets as well. If you're consistently getting something that is late in a bucket, so one bucket, let's say the social bucket is spot on, makes eye contact, smiles, babbles, focused, language, that's all fine. But let's say your baby hates tummy time. They never roll. They sit at 7 or 8 months. They never crawl. That's a bucket that says, okay, all the milestones in that bucket are actually delayed. And so either of those 2 scenarios, global delay or delay in one bucket, would be something that I would go, I would watch out for. And then I do want to just put a little bit of a nasty spin on this. And this is one that I know is close to your heart as well. And that is that sometimes you just know it. Like it sits in your gut, and you just know, like the milestones may or may not be off, or maybe they've all been fine and there's one that's really out, but something inside of you says, there's something going on. And I think that we must never underestimate that mum's intuition and dad's intuition.
And I mean, I know I feel like I'm pivoting a little bit about the space, but I mean, at what point, this is where that early intervention conversation starts to arise, right? At what point is it valuable for parents to reach out? Is it that gut point? Is it, do you take the gut? Do you take the milestones? Like, early parenting, you second guessing yourself. I'm a first time mom. Everyone else knows what they're talking about. I don't like, where does that sit in terms of when should parents seek help? Because we know that early intervention is a game changer. What does that look like?
Seek help as soon as you've got that gut feeling. And
Okay.
I think that gut feeling is it's such a incredible gift that mums and dads have. And so if you're feeling like there's something off here, take it to your next well baby visit. You can reach out on Aya and ask Aya some questions, our little chat bot inside the app. And then reach out to somebody that a well baby, kind of nurse or a health visitor, obviously, or home visitor are good places to start. And I think what's the worst thing that happens? They say to you, you know what? It's okay. You're fine. Let's give it another month and let's chat again. That's what they should say to you if they're not worried, is let's give it another month. If they are worried, they will then say, you know what? Let's take a little bit further and have an investigation with a neuro pediatrician or just a pediatrician.
What are the sensory signs that your baby might be struggling with the world around them?
I love that question. So, I think we need to think about these beautiful, immature little brains. They've been in this perfect environment where everything is just perfect for them in utero. And the world in utero is really, really muted. Babies are protected from loud noises by the mother's stomach and her skin. They have white noise behind them. They've got deep pressure and that tight hug of the uterus. They've got no visual input. And of course, we know our visual senses are most overwhelming ones. So everything within this beautiful womb environment is so perfect. And all babies, after they're born, absolutely all babies, have to learn to navigate the busyness of our world. It's a sensory overload. And I just had an experience recently, Tove, where I went from Africa to New York. And that is brutal. We ended up having an apartment, which we never realized at the time, that was actually physically on Times Square. The physical overload and overwhelm was so real. And my husband and I were able to reflect on how we were feeling and overwhelm of actually moving through the streets. I mean, getting back into our apartment and going, oh, we can breathe again. And, I think that's what life is like for a newborn baby. They've gone from an African savannah into Times Square, and it happens overnight. And so that overwhelm shuts them down, and they're actually very, very quiet and very sleepy for a few weeks. And then after that, as their sensory systems start to awaken, which happens between 10 and 14 days, suddenly they're taking in everything that is in their environment. And it really does mean that they've got to start to navigate overstimulation. Now, the signs of overstimulation are things like just looking away, or falling asleep all the time and not being able to stay awake, or grimacing and rubbing their ears, or if they're over 9 weeks, sucking on their hands. And then, of course, the extreme signs of overstimulation are crying and fussing and eventually inconsolable crying, that kind of what we call purple crying, which is obviously named because the baby pretty much goes purple when they're screaming. So all of those, we've all have, yeah. So all of those are signs that your baby has been trying to navigate our busy world and is not quite getting it right, and they're going to need some support.
And I'm going to share a story on my side. I mean, I think it was my youngest Nova, who was preemie, was not meeting some milestones, and was, I think, what we ended up calling you in, right, to come and spend the day with us and figure out what was going on. And the first thing you said to us was that the environment, because I have two other children, is too noisy. It's too busy. She's shutting down. She's not hitting those milestones, not necessarily because she can't, but because she's not processing the world around her, right? So, I mean, the best piece of advice you gave us was remove her from the noise, spend that time with her, create that serve and return. But I think what's really interesting about what you've just said here is how that sensory environment impacts the milestones, right? They go hand in hand.
Yeah. And in fact, you've brought up Nova, and she is just really, in all my days of working, she's been such a classic textbook of what really went on. So Nova was born premature, and the fact that you brought it up, I'm taking that you've given me some permission here to just talk a little bit about her. So she was born premature. And for any mom who's got a baby who's born before 38 weeks, those nervous systems are really, really sensitive and they need a very different world to come into. So, in an ideal world, what we do, and we do this in the neonatal ICU, is we replicate the womb world. We make it very quiet and very calm. And when a lot is going on for that developing brain, the brain actually eventually goes into a space of self-protection where it goes, you know what, I'm just going to take care of myself right now. And that means I can't reach out and go outward. And of course, with Nova, we were not worried about that in the slightest because we knew exactly that was exactly what was happening for her. She was not responding to people because she was just taking care of what was going on in her brain. And so because she was born so prem, I think she was about 6 weeks prem, we didn't worry about it until around about what her due date was. And around about what her due date would be, we started to think, she's adjusted age birth. And so probably we can expect her to, because we adjust a little bit and we give her a bit of leeway, we can probably expect her to be responding like a 2-week-old baby and start to make eye contact. And she didn't. And that was our first red flag, that actually Nova wasn't really wanting to connect then because she was overwhelmed. And then you and I sat together in your lounge, looked around the room and went, oh my goodness, that TV's on all the time because we have toddlers in the space. And moms, if you've got a second baby or third baby, you know this world. You know that there's this constant background noise in the environment. And of course, often very little ones sleep better in noisy spaces. So we kind of have them sleeping in these noisy background noise spaces. But actually what's going on is they're never getting a defrag time. And so just moving our little ones from a very busy space, which is overwhelming, busy, toddlers, noise, background TV noise, into a quiet nursery to sleep is actually a wonderful thing to do. So I would say that's the first principle, is you're going to watch that your baby is actually coming out of her cocoon and is starting to make eye contact. The second thing is, if she's not, you're going to look around the room and go, okay, what's going on? How overwhelming is this? Because some babies, it didn't happen for Nova, but for some babies, they'll just become hysterically fussy and crying. So it's not that they're not interacting, they are interacting, but they're crying. They're very colicky as well. And that's because, again, she didn't show that, but other babies will show it that way. They will, she just went into kind of almost shut down. Everybody, my bubble is bigger. I'm going to keep my bubble and you're not going to come in. Another baby might be very fussy. And so we really need to watch those little signals of making sure that they do have moments of what we call calm alert. And in those calm alert moments, they're making eye contact and they're starting to take a real interest in people. And if they're not doing that, or they're very fussy, it is a sign to us of our little babies that we need to regulate their environment, give them calm sleep spaces, and certainly stop the background noise.
What is the one thing you want every parent of a newborn to kind of hold on to at this time where you're kind of adjusting into your new world as a mom, trying to find your groove, dealing with your hormones, dealing with the change of dynamic in your family if you've got multiple kids or a partner? The lack of sleep is it's like water torture, trying to like come to terms with that. And you've got this new person that you're trying to keep alive at base one and then check for cues and make sure everything is good for them. What is that one thing that you want parents to sit with?
Today's Dose of Sense is brought to you by Parent Sense, the expert-based parenting app that gives you daily support from pregnancy to sleep, feeding, and daily routines. Take the guesswork out of parenting. Download Parent Sense today and use the code SENSE50 for 50% off.
What is that one thing that you want parents to sit with?
So the one thing would be the phrase less is more. And I think, that is a very important theme for 0 to 6 weeks, is that actually the less you do and the less you fill your life with, the better it's going to be for you. And, there are cultures globally that do this incredibly well. They cocoon mums, they remove mums from the environment. The mom leaves her partner and goes to her own mother's home and sits with her mums and her sisters, and nothing goes on for her. Like it's a cocoon space. In the Western world, we're just not very good at doing that because our lives are so full before our babies are born. We default back there very quickly. So when I'm talking about less is more, I'm going to flag a couple of things. First of all, less social interaction for you as a mom and for your baby. So, don't go and try and fill your days with social interactions. Don't put your newborn, your 4-week-old in the car and drive them to a stimulation group 15 kilometers or miles away. Don't have that Friday night Shabbat dinner full of people around. Don't have that Saturday afternoon bride with everybody. Just take a break and actually do less. And in those moments of doing less, you might feel a little bit isolated at times, but actually you are just giving yourself a bit of breathing room. So have fewer people around you, have social, obviously, but make sure it's with a smaller group and not as much pressure. So that's for you as the mom. Less pressure is important. Please don't work. And, I know the temptation, because Tove, you and I have both been entrepreneurs when we've had our third children. Both of us, as Nova was born and as Emily was born, we both had new businesses. And the temptation is to jump straight back into email and back into meetings when your little one's sleeping. I appeal to you that this is a moment in time where less is really more for you. What's also true about less is more is stimulation. And I think, this goes back to our very opening conversation, is like what is important, in terms of milestones. Don't worry about the milestones. Like I say, just being alive in the world is actually sufficient stimulation for your little one. They only have about 45 minutes of awake time between sleeps. And in those 45 minutes, it's a feed, it's a nappy change or a diaper change. It's a little bit of stimulation under a mobile for 5 minutes. It's maybe a little baby massage once a day, for 3 minutes. It's tiny, it's nothing. And so don't go in with, I need to, in these 45 minutes, maximize the time, stimulate, put them under black, white, and red mobiles. Make sure, just take the pressure off, because being alive will be sufficient for your baby. They will, with no stimulation, with no additional stimulation in those first 6 weeks, their brain is already developing beautifully. So definitely less is more. And I also think in those first 6 weeks, the only stimulation that really holds value is probably two things: social and touch. So let me just break it down into those. The social is quiet moments of eye contact, little bits of serve and return. The baby looks at you, you look back at them, and maybe there's an inkling of a smile and you smile back. So that little bit of eye contact and social interaction, and language, speaking to your baby, speaking through what you're doing, because language is always important from the get-go, and your voice is so soothing. So that's the only one bucket that you definitely want to have as a stimulation activity, is just making contact with your baby, relationship. And then the other piece would be touch. And that is that our touch system is a system that is so beautifully integrated in utero and is ready for a little bit of stimulation afterwards. And that's things like baby massage, or carrying them in a carrier, or swaddling them. Those type of touch inputs are very good, very regulating, and also very stimulating at the same time for your babies. So first 6 weeks, less is more, social interaction or engagement, and touch. That's all you need to focus on, other than obviously the rudimentary eat and sleep.
And Meg, is there anything for parents? I mean, from my perspective, is understanding your own sensory personality and understanding your own sensory needs to be able to regulate yourself. So while your baby's frazzled or crying or dysregulated, you're now tired, like understanding how to regulate your own being before you can regulate your small human.
Yeah, and this is where we talk about goodness of fit, and about the mother infant or father infant dyad. So you're two pieces of the same circle. You're two halves of the same circle. And so when your baby is sparking off and crying, it is going to do the same to you. Those little mirror neurons in your brain respond. You go into a stress state. You want to calm them, and so this stress that your baby has brought ignites stress in you, and vice versa. If you've had a really busy day, and we see it, busy day, low milk supply, you're super frazzled because your toddler's sticky and they've been on you the whole day, and then you've taken them to a birthday party and you're frazzled, you get to 6 o'clock in the evening and you are frazzled and you're in your red brain and your baby is now fussing as well. So you definitely do spark off each other. And so, your baby can't self-regulate. They just can't. Their immature brain does not allow it, which means that you've got to co-regulate, which means that what you've got to bring is a calm world that can connect in with their world, even when they're fussy, in order to be able to calm them. Now, that's so much easier said than done, because when we're in our red brain, to get ourselves into our green brain, in other words, to calm ourselves down, is hard. And I think it's just a very valuable thing to think about for when you get there. The first thing is, moms, you need to recognize your own signals. So when your heart is beating and you've got, you're sweating and you've got a red rash on your neck, or you've got your sweaty palms, or you've got whatever's happening for you, whatever your signal is, recognize your signals. So your very first thing is recognize your signals that you are now not in a self-regulated state. And then what you're going to do is you're going to step out of that by doing some mindfulness. And, I think mindfulness is just way underestimated. It is so incredibly powerful. And it doesn't mean that you have to go and sit on a yoga mat and meditate with a gong in the background. I mean, it's not that. So it's just taking a deep breath and just going, I'm going to do 3 square breaths. And the square breath is 6 seconds in, 6 seconds hold, 6 seconds out, 6 seconds hold, 6 seconds in, 6 seconds hold, and so on. And you do the squared breathing. You just do 3 of them. And I promise you immediately, and there's lots and lots of research that's now showing this, that just by changing our breathing, we change our state. And that's a tip as the first thing. Second thing is, we were given the gift of breastfeeding as a break in our days. And, I think there are multitudes of reasons why breastfeeding is good for us. But breastfeeding was actually given to moms, not just to babies. And what it does is a few things. When you're breastfeeding, there are the most incredible neurotransmitters that are released for calm. So, if you take the moment, you will find that your oxytocin is released, and you can actually really start to have that kind of calm and fall in love and sleepy, dozy moment. That's why we kind of do drift off when our babies are sleeping. So, I definitely think that breastfeeding is a moment in which moms can actually use for mindfulness. And so, an example would be, instead of immediately picking up your phone as you start your breastfeed, actually just sit, place your phone next to you, even if it's just for 5 seconds of your breastfeed. Do your breathing exercise, focus in on your baby's head, absorb your baby's smell, feel their skin, and all of those things, the sounds, the smells, all of that's actually mindfulness, just in that one moment. And then you can break away and you can go back into your phone or whatever else. But just do those 2 things. So the one is the square breathing when you're feeling stressed, and the other one is use breastfeeding or even bottle feeding as a mindfulness moment. And those would be my piece of advice there.
Okay, and Meg, before we wrap up, are there any last nuggets of wisdom you want to leave with mums before we close off?
Yeah, so I think, these early days are just so brutal. And I think the first thing is to be kind with yourself, to surround yourself with people who make you feel better about yourself as a parent. If there are people that make you feel like you're failing, whether it is a Instagram, perfect influencer, or whether it is a TikTok video that's giving you an instruction that conflicts with your gut, or whether it is a family member, an in-law, or your own mom who is making you feel more stressed about yourself, remove yourself from those situations and be conscious about it, be assertive about it, and say, this is not serving me. And if it doesn't serve me right now, it's not serving my baby. So, create a lot of boundaries around the influences or the influence that comes into your brain. For partners, I think this is such a critical time. And I often talk about the vessel around the mother-infant diet. So you've got this mum and this infant that are just piecing it together hormonally in terms of feeding, trying to learn each other's rhythms. And the father occupies an incredibly important space. And I always call it a vessel. It's almost like a little bit of a jar around the mom and the baby, into which they can actually just survive. And that means being the buffer to the world. So partners, if you can, and this is a message, moms, if you are listening to this and you can, share this with your partner. This whole episode would be useful for them. But really a very strong message to partners is to be the buffer, to stop the outside world coming in. If you can see that there's a person that triggers your partner, or if you can see a circumstance or a schedule that just is going to overwhelm them completely, you're the one who actually draws in those boundaries and said, you know what, we're going to have some quiet time. So that's the next thing. The next thing is, the voices in your room need to be people who validate you and make you feel better. And I was very fortunate to have that in my mum. She kept telling me, you're an incredible mother. I mean, look at how awesomely you do that. And when somebody says that to you, you feel better. Because early mothering doesn't feel like that. Early mothering is like, what the heck am I doing? And you need a voice who will say to you, you're awesome. And, if you're listening to this and you are a mom of an older baby and you've got a friend who's having a baby now, that could be the very best thing that you could be for them, is a validator to say, you are amazing, mom. Like, you just are so natural at this. Because even when she doesn't feel like she's being natural, she actually, just saying that will allow her to access her gut. And then, of course, just reiterating what I said earlier, is because of this immature nervous system, one of the most important things you can do is do less is more. So less stimulation, less pressure around your baby. And so I think if you do those things, it gives yourself the space to breathe and to grow into this new role and to move into matrescence a little bit more calmly. There are still going to be terrible days. There are going to be days you feel like you're failing, but this will just give you a little bit of reassurance that you're on the right track.
Amazing, Meg. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing such wisdom. And I think if there's one thing I hope parents take away from the conversation today, it's that you do not need to do everything perfectly for your baby to thrive. What matters the most is that you're responsive, there's a loving connection, You're turning into your baby, noticing them, responding to them, and giving yourself permission to learn alongside them. You're both learning each other's world together. So thank you so much. It was fascinating, incredibly reassuring for parents. And for anyone wanting more personalized support, mile tracking, sleep guidance, expert-backed parenting advice, you can always download the Parent Sense app for ongoing support for every stage of your parenting journey. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining me today. I hope today's conversation brought you a little more clarity, calm, and confidence on your parenting journey. If you enjoyed the episode, please do share it with a friend who needs to hear it today, and also go and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss out on an episode. I'll be back next week with another episode, same time, same place, and always here to support you. And in the meantime, download the Parent Sense app to take the guesswork out of feeding, sleep, weaning, routines, and everything in between.